What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mom Chats Podcast. I'm so excited for today's conversation. We are going to be hopping back on Zoom with my friend Paige, who lives in Northern California with her family. I actually met Paige on Instagram a couple of months ago, which is so fun, and I'm so excited for today's conversation. I feel like it's going to be so encouraging to young moms and also just some practical advice on how to keep time and make time for being creative even in motherhood as things are so busy. And so something we're going to talk about in today's episode a little bit more is Paige also has her own podcast, which is so fun. Her podcast is called Love in a Cottage. And so I'll make sure to link that down below if you're a young mom, a young wife, maybe just a young girl wanting to just seek out advice from people who are a little bit older than you. Her podcast is such a good resource and tool, and I have gotten to tune into a couple of episodes, and it is just so fun. So thank you again for joining us for today's episode on Mom Chats Podcast. Let's get into it. Okay, perfect. Good to go. Yay, I'm so excited. Okay, so like I mentioned a little bit in my intro, we are chatting with my friend Paige today, which I'm so excited about. Paige, do you mind just quickly introducing yourself? I know that, 5-7 minutes, however long, just to tell us a little bit about who you are, your family, all the things.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. This is so
Yes.
much fun. I am so used to being in your position. So I'm excited to be on the other side, but a little
I'm kind of intimidated by this. I'm like, this is professional podcaster here. I'm 5 podcasts in, so.
no, not at all. Not professional at all. Um, my name is Paige Geidel, and I am 23, and I live in California with my husband, John, and we have been married for I say almost 5 years. We just hit 4 last November, but I've been saying almost 5. That sounds crazy. We got married in 2018 when I was 19 and John was 23. And we're from the same small town in Kansas. So our love story is kind of like a Hallmark movie a little bit. He
I
was
love
like
it.
the lifeguard, but he was old. He was a senior in high school and I was in 8th grade. So he was kind of just like this cute boy who, in this small town was like the lifeguard and skated around town. And I thought was so cute, but he's old. I'm never gonna actually date him, but my friends and I will crush on him, whatever. Um, but basically, our parents were friends, and there was this annual Christmas party every year that we went to. And he had just graduated college and moved back home and had broken up with his longtime girlfriend and was a youth pastor living in his parents' basement. And I had just finished my first semester of college, but I knew that he was going to be at this Christmas party. And I knew that he was recently single. So I had my friends come over and it was kind of silly, but I picked out this outfit, oh my gosh, maybe he'll notice me or whatever, because it wasn't a huge group of people. And I had my plan. And anyways, basically over the next 2 weeks, we went on a date every night. And before I went back to school, he was like, "This is crazy, but I love you." And I was like, "I love you, and I'm gonna marry you." And then 5 months later, we got engaged, and then we got married 5 months after that. So it was just
Wow.
really
Literally within 10 months, whole life, all the things.
yeah,
I love it.
so insane, so insane. And yeah, it's of course wild now. Not that that was that long ago, but I'm like, who let me get married? I was a year out of high school. That's insane. But it was totally just the Lord. And yeah, our story, I feel like since then has just been really sweet and really fast. So we moved to London for a semester right after we got married because I was still in school and studying abroad. And that was a really special time for us to
Totally.
just be together, and we got to travel, and we were a part of a really amazing church community, and that was really formative for us. It was a charismatic Anglican church. And um, then we moved back to the States, and I was finishing my degree and John was starting grad school, and we found out we were pregnant. So I had endometriosis, And I'm like doing the full deep dive.
Yeah,
I'll try.
do it. Do it. I love it. This is all great information. I already have so many questions, but keep going. This
Okay.
is awesome.
Yeah, it's almost like that's what happens when you get like a toddler mom who's like having one-on-one without her
Yeah,
kid
you're like, I have so much to say. Yeah.
forever. But yeah, I had endometriosis, and so did, like, it was diagnosed by a doctor. I had actually had a surgery for it. And my mom had endo, and my grandmother and my aunt, and it all took them like years to conceive. And so even like before we got married, we just had conversations like, we want a lot of kids, we want to homeschool, and we don't know if this is going to be like a big process. And so once we hit, I remember it was like April of 2019. I was planning to graduate in December of 2019. And we were like, okay, basically anytime after April, like if it happens, and not that it would have been the end of the world if I got pregnant in college, but we were just so close to the end of that anyways. That was only like 5 months into our marriage. So we were like, after we hit this point, like if the Lord blesses us with a child, then okay.
Right.
Well, we had that thing it was going to be like, I don't know, 3 years. I don't know what we were expecting, but we got pregnant like 2 months later. Like, praise God.
Yes, amazing.
So, yeah, we had our daughter Flora. And then 8 months after she was born, we got pregnant with our daughter Juliet and had 202, which I know we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is so much more I could say about all of that, but that is kind of an overview. We've had a bit of a crazy time, even just with moving. We were in Southern California for most of that. I went to Azusa Pacific, and that's where John got his master's from. So we were in the like Azusa, Glendora area near Pasadena. Moved back to Kansas, where we're both from, to be near family for 10 months. Had a whole thing happen with my husband's job. And we are now in Northern California, where he is serving as a worship pastor on staff at our church full time. And I am full time mom and podcast.
Yes.
So I feel like that, I have no idea how long that was, but that
No,
is.
that was perfect. I don't either. I wasn't paying attention, but I loved it. It was detailed, and I feel like just it will guide into our conversation today so perfectly, which I love. So I have so many specific questions, but just kind of starting off on like how I have like traditionally ran this podcast. Something that I ask everyone is I feel like there's so many like misconceptions that we can go into motherhood with of just like, oh, I thought it would be this, but it's this, And I know we've gotten to chat about this a little bit on the phone,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what is the biggest lie you believed going into motherhood that was just like, whoa, that was absolutely not what I expected, but also great in its own way, just different?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I was thinking back to our conversation, and it's interesting. I was even like praying before we got on this call, and I think my journey was a bit um different in the sense that like I really thought that it would be, I don't know if easy is the right word. Um but I kind of thought like I wouldn't have to alter my life in any way. Like baby's just like the accessory. Like I'm gonna be a mom who like, I hear moms say like you can't do certain things that you used to be able to do. And I was like, well, I'm out here to like prove that wrong. Like I'm going to all my favorite spots. I'm just bringing my kids along with me. And there is absolutely something to be said about that. Like, I definitely believe in some element of that, but I think I just didn't realize the degree to which I would have to like die to myself. And also
Mm,
that it would be good for me and I would like find joy in that. So I say, obviously, die to yourself if you're a believer. You're familiar with that phrase. That's what Jesus called us to do.
right.
And that was something that I had never had to like face head on. Like I grew up as an only child. So think about that. Like I at school, like I guess had to share, but it was not like a daily, hourly
Totally.
thing where I was like having to give and take with siblings. Like I kind of
Definitely.
had like my parents just loving me and catering to me, and I didn't have to like deal with conflict in that way. And I was very like driven, high achieving, like to a fault, good girl. Um, so yeah, I mean, marriage, of course, kind of forced me to work on like loving someone else and catering to their needs and dying to myself. But Man, having a child who just depends on you fully.
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't expect how hard that would be. And also, like I said, how good it would be and how much I would take joy in that, though it is painful and hard in a process. Like, yeah. And I didn't expect how much resistance I would have to the,
totally.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
For
So,
sure. I was listening to a podcast, which I think, do you listen to the Attentional Parents podcast? I feel like I've heard you mention it before, but okay, I thought so. I was listening to it was an old episode, but I was just listening to it. But it was talking so much about that, how it was, I think the title of it was like these nothings or the practice of these nothings or something like that, which was like, I feel like put so much into perspective for me of just like how even just like mom and dad roles in parenting is like so different. And I feel like I'm like at the point of learning all of those things of like dying to myself and serving. So yes, definitely so real and such a real process for sure. So, okay. And what is something sweet that you never expected?
oh, so many things. I mean, I have two girls, and I think Flora, she's almost 3, and man, just her vocabulary, not even like purely the words that she knows, but her sweet heart and how I learn from her, and she like ministers to me daily. Like
That's the
yesterday she's
best.
like, Mama, what's in your heart? And I was like having a bit of a hard time, but I didn't think it was that obvious. I wasn't like crying or upset or whatever. We are just kind of going about our day, and I was like, I don't know, Flora. Like, I need to ask Jesus about it. And she goes, Lord, what's in Mama's heart? Or she'll just like spontaneously sing worship songs, or like if she sees that her little sister Juliet is like having a hard time. This is not every time, but
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes, she'll be like, we should pray for her. And just like the childlike faith that she has. And um, it's just humbling and amazing, like how forgiving she is, even to me. Like, I feel like I have to apologize to her regularly, like, Mommy's so sorry. I like got upset and that really wasn't your fault. I was just like overwhelmed or
Totally.
whatever it is. Like, I just am so overwhelmed and see the Lord's grace to me like through her very regularly. So that's been precious. And of course
Yeah.
there are fun, like she's picking out her outfits now, and even just seeing that like sibling dynamic is something I always wanted. Being an only
Right.
child, I always wanted more siblings. That was like kind of just a theme in my upbringing of feeling just lonely and wanting to belong, because I didn't really have a lot of like cousins either who we were close with. And so, yeah, I remember my favorite movies were like Cheaper by the Dozen and Yours, Mine, and Ours, like, like big families. And I
Yes,
watched every week, and I just dreamed about like the beautiful chaos of like a big family. And that is
totally.
not to say that big families equal, perfect happy families. I think every time I talk to someone who's like the oldest of 7 or, the middle of 6 or whatever it is, like I try to pick their brain and be like, okay, what did you like? What did you not like? Because I don't want to just be blind and ignorant. But that sibling dynamic is really sweet. And yeah, just Flora's heart and love for the Lord at an early age is
That
precious.
is that is so fun. Also, I love that like I feel like your perspective is so unique. Also, I feel like I don't see your perspective as much. Like if somebody comes from being like an only child or maybe one of two, like I feel like that's pretty like okay, you have one kid or you have two kids. It's like all you've ever known. So I love that it's like almost like upside down in the sense of like you were an only child, but you're like so badly I want to be able to give my kids this, which is so fun. I am the oldest of 7 and my husband is the third of 6. I actually don't know where he is in the birth order. So we're both from like huge families and want a huge family, but like it's still like a different dynamic in that sense, which is so fun and just different in and of itself. So I love that you like want that for your kids. So
Yeah, I feel like whenever I like easily get, and I think a lot of moms would relate to this, like sensory overwhelm. Like it happens multiple times a day, especially now that I would say Julia is like a toddler. Like she's 16 months, but she's the second born. So like walking just super verbal and hilarious and so
yeah.
funky. And so it's like, yeah, even though I'm picking up all day, whatever, like my house just feels like there's stuff everywhere. There's food everywhere. There's like music and all kinds of things. And I think part of that is just something that I'm continuing to learn how to, like, create systems or whatever. But at a certain level, it's just inevitable, especially when you
Right.
don't have kids to help with the youngers. And so I don't even know where I was going with that on the train of thought. Oh, I think, yeah, basically, there are times where I'm like, wow, it would be so easy to stop right now. Like, if I did not have another kid, then in a couple years, we're like out of this, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong with having smaller families, but I just feel we feel called to have a bigger family. And I can see how the Lord is using like this lack of control through young children to really refine me, because
Totally.
I can choose to be like overwhelmed and in a bad mood or like hyper controlling. I think that's how I tend to lean. Although sometimes I lean towards like slothfulness of like, whatever, we'll just let it all go.
Right.
Uh, but to be somewhere in the middle and just like almost like your breath, like praying, just praying without ceasing, just like,
Yeah.
Lord, I need help, like help me with the next right step, help me get through the next like meal, whatever it is.
Right, right.
I can see him using the chaos to really refine me, and it's good.
Totally, totally. I know. What a fun season. What like an important season that I feel like you're in the midst of, but it's so fun. It's also like so encouraging to get to hear from this because it's like I would love for that to be us one day. We only have one kid right now, but maybe one day like we'll be in the midst of learning all that and I'll probably be replaying this podcast,
Oh,
just learning from everything you were saying during that season, which is so fun. So something I've heard you talk about on your Instagram often, which I love, is still prioritizing like creativity and having creative spaces in motherhood, which I know even how you like opened up with like there's so much that we have to dive to. How, well, starting off, why is that so important to you and how have you like woven that in to motherhood without having it be like overbearing, but like also just having it be a part of your guys' life?
yeah. Oh, trial and error. And here, I'm in my studio right now. For people who are just listening, they won't be able to see this, but it's just
Yeah.
total chaos. This is
Yeah.
our studio space. John is a musician, and it's so fun that we get to have this space just where all of our creative things live. Though we said it was going to be childproof, and they're in here all the time, so it's okay. But yeah, I think I've always loved to be creative, though that expressed itself in many different ways over the years. And I loved the idea, especially having girls, of like being able to sew dresses for them or make them little quilts and just like look around my home and see things that I have created. And
Yeah.
so that started with like I had learned to sew in high school. My mother-in-law is a quilter, so that helps that I have her as a resource. And
Totally.
um, yeah, it was. I'm trying to think of how I kind of even got back into it. I mean, I wasn't sewing regularly before having Flora, though I think I got a sewing machine for Christmas, like the Christmas right before she was born. And the first thing I was like regularly sewing was a quilt that I made when she was, I don't know, I think she was like 6 months old. It took me like a couple months until she was almost one. But that was really wonderful because I had something to look forward to. And so in the evenings when John was in class and she was in bed, I would just spread everything out. At that time, we were in a very tiny 2-bedroom apartment. I don't even think you could call it 2 bedrooms because the second bedroom was so small.
Yeah.
And didn't have like a studio of any kind. So I would like get everything out on the floor and the dining room table and then have to like put it all back the next day or whatever. But yeah, I made a quilt. And I think there's something about working with your hands that can really help you like process your emotions or your day or just like pray. And it's so therapeutic for me. It's different than like obviously cleaning is a chore and some people really enjoy it. And I've come to like really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Same with cooking, but it's like something that ultimately you have to do. And it's also something that is like a revolving door, right? So with cooking, you have to cook another meal the next day. You always will have to be cooking constantly, right?
Right.
And same thing, like you clean up a mess and then it gets messy again. But with making things, especially like, making things with your hands, it's something that you do and it stays done and then it's beautiful and you get to just enjoy it.
Totally. I love that perspective.
Yeah, it's just so satisfying, especially when you have young children, I feel like, and you feel like your work is constantly being like undone or you're having to redo things just monotonously. And so, yeah, that was really fun to quilt, um, to make that. And then I learned to knit in the last couple of years. So I've made a few sweaters and just some little like hats and things. And I do like embroidery, and I definitely could be better at like finishing projects. Like I'm looking at a list that says Paige's projects, and some of them I've been doing for like a year and a half, and I'm like trying to just finish things before I start anything new because it can get overwhelming
Yeah,
when you have too many things going. But yeah, I just think that it's so easy to convince ourselves that like, and I know we'll talk about phone stuff too, but that it's like self-care or whatever you want to call it, rest time, to
totally.
be like on your phone, on Instagram, on Pinterest. I have been there, and especially now having two very busy children. One, my oldest is not napping anymore. That's been such a huge adjustment.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, for sure.
I always knew that like I didn't feel great or rested or recharged, but like I had more options with how I spent my time. So I could kind of be like, okay, well, I'll do a little scrolling and then a little whatever. But now truly my time is so limited. I'm like, I can't do this to myself. Like, I will not feel good if that's how I'm spending my, half hour of free time.
Right.
So,
That's so
yeah,
good.
I don't know if that was cohesive at all. I
No,
hope.
that was perfect. And I also feel like a perfect segue into talking about the phone and social media usage and all the things. So, um, okay, where to start with this? First of all, I feel like I've heard, and we've talked about this too, just very disciplined and structured with phone usage and then also social media usage to the point of even getting like a whole new phone. So, do you mind just like walking us through and explaining that situation a little bit, and then we'll probably dive a little bit deeper into like specifics.
Totally. Okay, I feel bad. I thought of one more thing I wanted to say
Oh
before
yeah,
I
go for it.
move into this, but I think a lot of times people are like, well, how do you make time to like be creative, especially if you like didn't grow up sewing or if you're like really new to a skill.
Literally
Obviously,
me. I'm
you
like
have like
never sewed in my life. But so I'm like,
yeah,
yes, I need to know.
yes, well, if you have like one baby and they're still napping regularly, I think just knowing like not getting them down and then being like, oh, I feel like sewing. I mean, obviously you can do that, but I think being like, okay, on Wednesday of this week during nap time, here's what I'm going to do. So maybe you like have time to like get everything ready. So you're not like trying to watch a how to set up a sewing machine video or whatever. Cause I think that can be so frustrating when you're learning something and you're like, I just want to actually sew, but you're having to do all of the like prep work or whatever it is for
Right.
whatever you're doing. So really setting yourself up for success in that way, kind of just thinking ahead. And also just even asking your spouse for time. Like I feel like in marriage there's like give and take. I think any new parent, or even if your kids are a couple years older, knows like the conversation of like, can you watch them while I take a shower, or can you watch them while I make dinner, or whatever. Like you're constantly kind of chatting about time. And
Right.
so explaining like that's something that you'd want to do. That could be when they get home from work. That could be in the evening. You just saying like, can you watch the baby monitor or be in bed with them while I try this? So I feel like, most of the time, if there's give and take,
Right.
your spouse will want to do that. So that's something John and I will do.
Yeah.
Um,
Practical. I love it. That's great.
Yeah, but you asked about the phone and I laughed because things have shifted a little bit and this is still a struggle, you guys. I think it's just something that we are constantly having to dialogue about with each other and with the Lord and figure it out. And I feel like I've been totally failing lately in this area, but Yes, my husband and I got phones about a year ago, called light phones. So it's basically a phone that doesn't have a camera, doesn't have the internet. It has like a paperwhite Kindle screen. So it's not even like a bright LED screen. The only thing you can do on it is text, call, listen to podcasts, listen to music. You can do like it has a GPS for directions, and there's a calculator. I'm trying to think, but
Fancy,
you can't,
fancy.
yeah, you can't like look anything up. You can't take photos, no apps, nothing. Um, and we just realized that we spent so much of Flora's first year on our phones, and we were in a really stressful time. Both of our girls were born when John was in full-time grad school, and we had no income. Like we were literally taking out loans from my parents to like pay our bills. And it was just really hard. It was during COVID, like we had no family around, everything was like shut down. And I think a lot of people during the beginning of the pandemic were like just hunkering down on their devices. But we were just like, oh my gosh, we're not even enjoying her. We're not spending this time with each other. We're just like coping on meaningless stuff. This is so sad. Like we have to make a change.
Yeah.
And so when we moved to Kansas in October of 2021, we moved into a house that we were renting. And part of it was just like for purely financial reasons, but we are like, we're not going to get Wi-Fi. Like we're just straight up not getting it, because at his work, he could get on, check his emails. My parents lived half an hour away. They had Wi-Fi. So we were like, okay, we'll just plan to like do whatever we have to do.
Yeah.
We were there, and we were seeing them regularly. So yeah, we didn't have Wi-Fi for that whole like 10 months. I will say we were friends with our neighbor. She gave us her Wi-Fi, which was like awesome, but terrible, because then we like knew, we just knew it was
If you
there.
needed it, it was there. Right.
Yeah, so it was nice. Like, okay, we don't have to drive to the McDonald's parking lot if we need to like check an email. Um, but it only worked in like a certain spot
So
in our
did you
house.
have light phones at this time?
Yes, so we got
Okay.
light phones, like a few months after moving
Okay.
to Kansas, and it was hard and amazing. We still have them. So kind of how that worked is like I still have my iPhone, but it just like it's not on a plan, so it doesn't have data, and
Right.
it does connect to Wi-Fi. So part of what worked so well about that season was we didn't have Wi-Fi. So like I truly was disconnected. We did get Wi-Fi here at this house. So it's been a bit harder because I could access things at any time, but we did feel like it was necessary because we wanted to play music or just anything, like we
Yeah.
needed to have. And it felt like we had had a good little detox. I think what I like about it is I can shut off my iPhone, put it in a drawer for a week. You know what I'm saying? And like
Totally.
it doesn't matter because it's not like, oh, that's my only way of communicating with John. And I think that's what's complicated about people, even who like make their iPhones less uh what's the word? I guess dumb phones is what people call it. Like people
Yeah.
who take off Instagram and whatever, like there's still something deeply embedded in your brain that says, well, I can still just like go re-download it. And so
Totally.
I'm really struggling with um that temptation. And so yeah, we got our light phones, and they're a little glitchy at times, but they work great. And we have not looked back. I think, like I said, I still have that tension of like, okay, now we're in a house with Wi-Fi, so now it's still possible. But yeah, it's been a really good, interesting journey for sure.
Totally. Yeah, which I love that. I feel like I'm on at the beginning of that. I read Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I feel like sparks a lot of this in a lot of people, of just like the connectedness, the busyness, the go, 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 the like non-simple, extravagant life that we're living. And just being a mom of one and like figuring out all the things of like even just systems and rhythms for our home. I'm like, we say yes to a lot of things. Like whether that's yes to a lot of things as like things at Target that we don't need, or yes to a lot of things of time spent on the phone, or yes to a lot of things of like actual events and things like that. So I feel like I'm like on the very beginning steps of like praying through simplifying our life and not feeling guilty for it, because I feel like it's in our culture, especially like with getting to be instantly connected to the entire world at our fingertips, it's so easy to feel like, oh, like I feel bad for not saying yes to this, or I feel bad for not putting my kid in this sport or whatever, which we're not at that stage of life yet. But just yeah, trying to be prayerful and mindful of what simple living looks like in 2023, because I don't know. But yeah.
I know. And something else that John and I have been talking about very recently, even with his siblings who are close to, is this idea of indulgence. And there's a big difference between something being life-giving and something being indulgent, right? And like basically we're realizing how addicted we are to indulgence. Like, when is the next time I can indulge? That's
Right.
terrible. We're like, we need to indulge. But it's like, even if it's not your phone, you'll find something else. And that's what's been crazy. Like, okay, maybe we're not gonna like get on our iPhones anymore in the evening, but what are we gonna do instead? We're gonna watch a show, and I don't think, I mean, again, it's a fine line. Like, I don't think sewing is indulging, but I think it could easily be like, well, this is my time. This is my free time. Like, I have to do this. Like, I deserve to do this. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
We can just turn anything into an indulgence and something that
Yeah.
we think we deserve or we need. And part of what's come up for that with us is like bedtime has been nuts at our house for like a month and a half. And we, this is a whole controversial side thing, but we like had sleep trained Flora, was really sad about it because we didn't feel like she was ready. So Juliet is like total opposite, 16 months, still in my bed, still nursing. Like, John and I don't sleep in the same bed anymore at this point in time because he's sleeping with Flora. And like, Flora doesn't nap, and so sometimes she'll crash at like 4 p.m. and she will take a nap. And so bedtime is just wildly unpredictable. And we just aren't like, no, you have to go to bed right now, like cry or whatnot. So we are trying to go with a flow, but like obviously we're exhausted sometimes at 9 p.m. and they're like both awake. And what we're realizing is it's not that we can't rest with them up and around, but it's that we can't indulge in the same way. And we're like, oh, that is gross. Like, Lord, change our hearts, because we can like
Right.
be with the Lord and enjoy being with our family. And exhaustion is totally valid. But I don't know, thematically, that's just something we've been thinking about. Like, I think phones are an easy indulgence, but it could be a number of things.
For sure. Yeah, which is a really good perspective to have. If it's not one thing, it's going to be another thing. And so ultimately, it's like us learning to really desire Jesus and time with the Lord and all that we do. But it's just there's always going to be the things that distract us, whether we try to limit all of them and then it's become something else. So that's a really good perspective to have. Okay, I do still want to talk about 202. I know that was something we had chatted about talking about. But really quick before, I know you had mentioned this on the phone of just like time with the Lord and obviously like what your relationship with the Lord looks like now becoming a mom, because I think that that's something that changes so much. And even going a little bit back to that intentional parents podcast, talking about how like they like mentioned, and I know that they've mentioned this before, but like how literally like becoming a mom is like we can still have the same like spiritual experience and like encounters with the Lord as like a monk. Like I know that they were making that like I don't know, correlation to that. Which to me, like I feel like opened my mind in so many ways, because I'm like, I feel like I'm very new to even just figuring out like what this looks like, because I feel like it's easy to be like distracted, whether it's by your kid or the pile of dishes in the sink. So what has that looked like for you? How have you navigated that with having two littles at home?
Yeah. Well, real quick, yeah, love intentional parents. They're all amazing. And the book, The Domestic Monastery by Ronald Rolheiser, I believe, is just like amazing. The quick read is so good. It was like free on my like library Hoopla app.
I love it.
And yeah, I think so. I went from being a college girl to a mom in 3 months. Like I graduated from college in
Right.
December and had Flora in March. And I was at a Christian college at that, so like quiet time, um, coffee, Bible, journal, like I don't think those things are bad. I think it's such a sweet and treasured time to be able to just like have that with the Lord. But it's all depends on your family's decisions and parenting style. Some people choose to like put their babies in their crib from day one, and then their baby's 6 months old, they're not waking up in the night, and you're able to kind of resume
Right.
regular visits. But again, for us, we just haven't done things that way, and so I don't really get the option of waking up before Juliet. If I set an alarm for 5, she's up with me at 5. Like she will not sleep through that. So I've tried that. It's just been a lot of trial and error. But I do remember when Flora was like 9 months old, even though she was sleeping through the night, I was just kind of waiting. I don't know what I was waiting for things to like go back to the way they were, even though they never would.
Yeah.
Um, it just hit me like I was pregnant with Juliet, like I don't know, in my very first trimester, and I was like, oh, this is my life now, and I'm only gonna have more kids. Like I can't keep pushing off regular time with the Lord
Mm,
because this is literally my life for the next like 20 years. Like
right.
that's this is just it. And so I'm going to have to adjust my expectations, and that was hard. I had a really hard postpartum with Flora, and so I honestly don't remember much of what that looked like. I think it was here and there journaling, here and there Bible time, and um yeah, I have, so many thoughts, and I don't think any of them will be cohesive. I think that God speaks to us through his word, and that is so important. And I think that if you have time to be on Instagram, even if it's your job for like an hour or even half an hour a day, you have time to read like one Bible verse and just think about it. Also, I think that there are times where we are exhausted. And I think the Bible is not the only way that God desires to have a relationship with us or to speak to us. I know I've always been very drawn to prayer. And so I love taking walks. It's harder now when Flora comes because she is so chatty, which I love. But it's, that constant interruption that comes. It's like, even as I'm praying, she's like, Mama, what's that? Mama, can we stop here? Mama, look at that. It's like, okay, so I'll walk Juliet, like my nonverbal child who's just like in the stroller.
Yeah,
And I'll
yeah.
enjoy their walks that way, and that's been really helpful for me. Even just though being open to interruptions and praying while I'm doing the dishes or whatnot, that's so helpful to just talk through things with the Lord and listen to what he wants to say. I think worship music is amazing. That's another way that I really connect with the Lord, and just like, yeah, so simple, just playing it out loud while everyone's doing their thing around
Totally.
the house.
Yep.
And I feel like he always just meets us in unexpected ways with that. I'm amazed at, this even reminds me of your question earlier, like things that you didn't expect. Oh my goodness, the amount of like children's board books that are like Christian that I read, and then I read a line and then I'm sobbing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, the Lord totally speaks to me through my kids' books. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I love it.
I
That's
don't remember what it was. I think it's Sally Lloyd Jones' Song of the Stars. It's a Christian book. And I'm just like weeping the whole time. Or like Ellie Holcomb's books are like amazing, phenomenal. She actually has like albums that are so good that like go with the books, and they're not like corny
so
Christian
fun. I
songs.
didn't know that.
But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's amazing how I think the Lord speaks to us regularly. In all of those things, and then just leaning into the acceptance and obedience and dying to yourself. It's so
Yeah.
hard.
It
It's so hard. I say that and I'm like, wow, thinking of all the ways I resisted that. But there's a book called The Seeking Heart that um I it's kind of written like as short little essays, like it could be a devotional thing. I'll usually read like a couple essays at a time. And it's by this, I think he was a monk. like a couple hundred years ago, but it's just very like tough love, straightforward. And that's like really good for me, but in a way that's very encouraging, not like you're doing a terrible job, but he's like, why are you fighting the Lord as he tries to refine you? Just like die to yourself, just let it happen and it will be less painful and quicker.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Cool. Okay, noted. Got it.
yeah, yeah. But I think just allowing the Lord to meet you in your season and not putting him in a box so that way it has to look one certain way. You know, he desires to speak to us in so many ways. And it is really hard. It's totally a hard adjustment though, especially when you have that like routine of that special time beforehand. So I
For
know
sure.
it's something a lot of people have to mourn. But
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a heart adjustment is a really good way to phrase it because it's like, I don't know. I felt like either like even for me, like it was like, I kind of feel like I'm letting the Lord down in this, like I used to be able to like spend time and process all these things. And now it's like I like have things in my mind that I would love to sit down and journal and process and read through and pray through and whatever it is. But I'm not even able to give him that time or give him my full attention, I feel like in that time. So our heart posture is such a good perspective to have. So I
and
love
he knows, like he knows all the things that we have to do. He knows. And it's actually, I think, wrong when we are like annoyed at our child because they're like interrupting our like obviously that's contradictory, right? But I have been there so many times, like I'm trying to journal or I'm trying to listen to worship music or whatever it is, trying to be really focused and the floor is like needing me and I'm annoyed with her. Like the Lord is like, you're missing the whole thing, you're missing the
yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
so good.
easier said than done, but
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Okay. Last kind of topic I have is just chatting a little bit about two under two. I know that like I'm sure was a lot. Like, what was that season like navigating life with two babies, essentially? I also think it's so fun that they are both girls and so close in age. And how have you like gotten to even as they're young, but even gotten to see like their friendship develop, which I think is so special that you get a front row seat to that.
yeah, man. Well, it's nuts because Juliet turned 1 in September, which is just wild. I can't even believe she's like almost 1.5. Crazy. But yeah, that was a really interesting season. I think just because we also had so many other things going on in our lives
Totally.
with John finishing school and like a move and just so much happening. There wasn't a lot of like stability in a way. It was all just kind of happening at once. Excuse me, but yeah, we were so excited. Yeah, really special that they were both girls. I think something that I didn't expect that I don't like regret, but I think I didn't really savor Flora's like babyhood as much as I wish I would have. And that's something that I've kind of had to like process and mourn is like, wow, Juliet is like stepping into being a toddler for sure, but she has been like the baby, like just been cuddled and nursed and all these things. And like that was something that was sad that I feel like Flora missed out on a little bit. And I know that she is loved and treasured and adored and like we've really been able to spend more time together, but it was hard. Like I missed her so much, especially in those first couple months where it was like, okay, she can't be around because she's not that she can't be around, but like I have to protect the baby so Flora doesn't accidentally like hit her or whatever. I have to nurse her. I
Right.
have just all of these things. And there were more factors to that as well. But it is really fun that like Flora's never known life without Juliet. Like she
Yeah.
doesn't even remember,
That's so real. That is so fun. I love it.
She's nuts. Yeah. And they just are obsessed with each other. Like obsessed. It is so fun. Every morning they just like run to see each other. And yeah, it's been really fun. I actually think like I don't know, every season is just so different. So like I'll speak to the first 6 months, I would say wasn't um wasn't easy, but it felt easier in some ways because Flora was still napping very regularly. They were 17 and a half months apart. So Flora
Okay.
was like about 18 months when Juliet was born. So Flora was still napping regularly. Juliet was sleeping, like all the time, especially in her first 3 months. And so it felt like yeah, they both just slept a lot. So I didn't feel like it was a struggle to like tidy the house or cook or some of those things. And again, I had like family's help during that time. Um, and then yeah, it was hard in some sense that like I don't know. I just didn't know what to expect because I hadn't been around kids a lot and didn't have siblings. So it kind of felt like they were somewhat separate in that like they weren't playing together at that point. Um, Although I do remember like Flora wanting to like play with her when she was in her car seat sleeping or whatever it is. But again, it's like sleeping so hard, it generally wasn't a problem. I felt like they started to see more of their friendship when she was closer to one, even though they were doing everything together before.
Right.
Um, it is very interesting now. Okay, so yeah, Flora's almost 3, Juliet's almost 1.5. And now it's like the friendship is getting deeper and these sibling things are just happening all the time, right? I feel like I'm a referee. I feel like I am just constantly uh just mediating. So Juliet is like just this rowdy, fun, very sweet natured, but like loves to like tickle by like pulling Flora's hair and just like hitting her in the face is what she.
Yeah.
And Flora's very sweet and very sensitive and not as like physical. And so she just cries and I like mediate that, but it's hard because Juliet wants to interact with her and like she doesn't understand. But of course it's hard if Flora's ever, it's reversed and I'm like, Flora, you know better. Like you can't treat her like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now they're like fighting over books and just like, it's so many things. But I would say worth it. It's so sweet and precious. And I just love that there's nothing better than when, like I said, someone wakes up from a nap or it's the morning, or even one of them was out of the house while the other one was home and they get back to each other and they just,
They're just so stoked to see each other.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love it. That's great. What would you say to the mom who maybe like is wanting that, or maybe just found out that she's gonna have two under two, or like what would be advice slash encouragement that although you're gonna be in the thick of it for a little bit, what would just be some encouragement to that mom?
Yeah. Oh, it's so sweet. And I just think about the long term all the time, right? It's like, okay, even if it's really hard for a couple months or a couple years, like long term, I think it's such an opportunity for them to become friends. Like that's something I speak into them all the time is like, you guys are best friends. Like I really try to like pray that over them and speak that
Yeah,
over them. It's like,
so
yeah,
good.
and try to foster that right now rather than having this like negative um mentality of like, well, just wait until they're sisters and they're, I don't know. It's like, no, I'm not going to speak that over them.
Absolutely.
Not,
Yeah.
that's not biblical. Um, and I think just know like you will figure it out. I know there's so many logistical things, man, within motherhood. Like when you're going to the store, what do you do? How do you navigate that, right? I'll just say when I grocery shopped for the first year, I had Juliet in her infant car seat that clicked into the stroller. Flora would either I would wear her or she would walk. If you have a double stroller, great. And all the groceries went in the bottom little basket.
Perfect.
Even for mom who just has one, like that was like truly a game changer for me.
Yeah.
I think I'm becoming more relaxed in a sense with screen time. Like we don't own a TV, but I was so rigid about it initially. Like we will never do this. And like, if it's a matter of like me getting one of them down for a nap, like the youngest down for a nap, um, and not like even getting irritated with Flora, like if she would want to come in and be with us, and I'm like, no, honey, like if
Yeah.
it's me getting like mad at her or her watching 20 minutes or 15 minutes of Little Bear, like I'm just there. Like that's a wholesome show or there's great like Christian shows out there. And I don't know, I'm being less like legalistic about that, less rigid. Yeah, and you'll figure it out. Like I think the less rushed you can make yourself feel or the less situations you put yourself into where you feel like
Right.
to
That's
be
so
here. Like
good.
I feel like getting in and out of the door can be so much.
Yeah,
But also just like accepting you might be late sometimes and that's okay.
for
Like
sure. Yeah.
it's so much better to be like 10 minutes late to church. I'm sorry, we're almost late to church like almost every week. Which is so sad because my husband does the music at our church. So sometimes he's like, you missed it, huh? I'm sorry. So
God.
that's yeah, yeah. But like again, is it better for me to like yell at my kids or for us to be a few minutes late? Like you
Totally.
have kids, like no one's sitting there like upset with you or thinking that something's wrong with you, like if you're a little late, you know?
Totally.
So you'll figure it out. I think asking for help is great. Like we had a friend in Kansas who was just amazing. She was our neighbor and she didn't have any kids and worked very part-time. So I started just like asking her, like, do you want to come to Whole Foods with us? Do you want to like come do the thing with us? Like it was awesome. And she loved being around my kids. Like, so I think sometimes it's harder when you have friends who don't have kids and yes, they like may not fully understand, but also sometimes it can be a huge help to have an extra set of hands and just like fun to be with someone, to invite someone along in your
Totally.
like
That's so good.
team. So yeah, and eventually they will play together. They will read books and they will do all the things, but you know, they're little if you're having them two under two, and so that will come with time.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great. I love it. Okay, I know we didn't get to talk about the podcast much, but I'm definitely going to link that below. I don't know if you want to give a little like plug on it or explain it a little bit, but I definitely think that that could be a great resource for just wives, young moms, even young girls who are like, okay, I want to be married. I want to be a mom one day. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that or like any closing thoughts or encouragement, but today's conversation has been great. I'm so excited for people to get to join in and listen.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for letting me come and talk. This has gone by so quick. I fully
No.
get how I feel like my podcast episodes now are like well over an hour these days. Uh, but I host a show called Love in a Cottage. It's a nod to a Little Women reference, which is one of my favorite stories. But it's a show for creative Christian women, generally who are in their 20s or 30s, about marriage, motherhood, homemaking, and following Jesus. And like I kind of said, I had a really hard postpartum with Flora, just being a young new mom, feeling like no one was in my life stage, especially like where I lived, and really just craving community. I kind of like found some other young moms on Instagram, but like none of them lived near me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to just chat with them, learn from them, hear their stories. And so I started a podcast, which is so
Hey.
fun. And we're on a break right now. I'm not sure actually when this episode will air, but we're coming back in March. And yeah, I host podcasts and in person retreats so women can connect in person with other people who are like minded
I love
as
it.
well. Yeah.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah, this is going to air on February 21st. So it'll just be like a week or so away from the podcast being back up, which is perfect. So,
Yeah.
yes. Okay. Well, yay. Thank you again so much for being on. This was amazing. I know it's going to be so encouraging to so many people.
Kennedy, I am so honored. Thank you so much
Yes.
for inviting me to come on. And I just can't wait to see how the Lord uses your show to impact so many moms and to
Thank
encourage.
you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun to see how he's already used it. So it's been great. But thanks again, Paige.
Thank you.
See ya. Okay, what a fun conversation that we got to have with Paige today. Paige, thank you again for tuning in. I know for me personally, I'm so encouraged by today's conversation, and I know it's gonna encourage so many other young women. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to today's conversation of Mom Chats podcast. Like I mentioned earlier, I will also link Paige's Instagram and her podcast down below just so you can follow along and keep up with all the amazing things that she is doing. And we will see you back here next week with another episode of Mom Chats podcast. See you guys.